Rewatch Podcast presents the Wilder and Pryor Rewatch.
I don't believe this! Are you kidding?
Join us each week as we discuss the 4 films featuring comedy greats Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor.
The man's got something to say, let him say it.
Up yours!
Silver Streak,
This is fabulous!
Stir Crazy,
Jesus! You could have mustache!
See No Evil, Hear No Evil,
This is a scandal. What do you mean I'm not white? Why didn't you tell me this before?
and Another You.
You screwed my brain.
Send your feedback to the rewatchpodcast@gmail.com. Like our Facebook page, facebook.com/rewatchpodcast, and follow us on Twitter @rewatchpod.
Just pick up the phone and call your superiors. Tell them I have the Rembrandt letters.
Today we're discussing Another You, starring Richard Pryor, Gene Wilder, Mercedes Ruehl, Stephen Lang, and Vanessa Williams, directed by Maurice Phillips. Welcome back to the Rewatch Podcast. I'm Cory, and my favorite color is brown. I subscribe to the Reader's Digest. I love yodeling, and my favorite food is Wiener Schnitzel mit Rotkraut und Kartoffel.
I'm glad you had a go at that because I wasn't brave enough. And I'm Nathan, and don't ever call my friend a shithead again. How are you, buddy?
Excellent, mate. Great to be back talking some more Wilder and Pryor for sure.
I know. Well, this is the last one for the moment. We do have a surprise, which we'll talk about at the end of the episode. But as far as the strict Wilder and Pryor rewatches, I mean, obviously we've done Silver Streak, and then we went into Stir Crazy, and then we did See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and now we're into the final collaboration, Another You, which came out in 1991. Should we get into the trailer, Cory?
Let's do it.
We have someone very special here tonight. One of the greatest sax players around. The one and only, Mr. Eddie Dash.
I can have a degree here in 24 hours. From Harvard.
Hello? Anybody home?
Don't worry, he's got a titanium plate in there. When I hit him in the head, that actually feels good. Boy, that was good beer. I am not your husband. I'm a Volvo salesman. Eddie, why are we doing this?
I challenge you to pull this finger.
Come on!
Oh.
You are an inconsiderate child. You are an insect. You are a piece of dust. What have you got to say for yourself?
I missed you, dear.
Eddie, Eddie, Eddie.
Everybody! Ah! Don't you kiss me no more, man. I'm gonna kick your ass.
Oh, you can kick my ass.
Ah! You mother...
All right, welcome back. How about you kick off the trivia this week?
Okay, so Another You was released July 26th of 1991. It had a budget of $17 million, but had a meager box office of just under $3 million. It was a flop.
Yeah, this film did pretty poorly. In my research on like box office figures during that period, I mean, it only really stuck around for a couple of weeks and then shifted off the radar. I mean, it opened against quite a few films, truthfully. It opened against the Mel Brooks film Life Stinks, V.I. Wachowski, or do you remember that film? And Mobsters. And obviously during that period as well, there was T2 was #1 at the box office. It had been out for 4 weeks in that period. Boys in the Hood was out. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was still in the cinema. Point Break was in its 3rd week of release, and The Naked Gun 2.5 was killing it in its 5th week of release during that period. And to be truthful, man, like from a studio perspective, the fact that they kind of released this film up against that kind of competition is an interesting one. I mean, like, I can't imagine they would have been that confident when they actually saw the final thing, don't you think?
Going down our trivia list, I had this a bit further down in our trivia, but while we're talking about it, I guess, this film was, like, they shot a lot of this film over in New York. A whole bunch of it with a completely different director. Apparently, the studio was not happy with the dailies that were coming back, and they called up the director at the time, who was Peter Bogdanovich, and they pretty much just said, we don't like it, and you're getting replaced. And they brought on Maurice Phillips and rewrote the script a little bit, and then went over to LA and reshot all the stuff that was done in New York in LA.
It's interesting that they got Maurice Phillips. It's clear that they kind of got someone that they could possibly kind of control a little bit. He did do another feature film prior to this called Enid is Sleeping in 1990, which I know nothing about, and another film in 1986 called The American Way. And it's actually interesting. Enid is Sleeping, in my research on this film, Enid is Sleeping is actually described on IMDb as a female version of Weekend at Bernie's. It is actually stars Elizabeth Perkins, Judge Reinhold, and Jeffrey Jones, and Rhea Perlman, of all people. So I didn't even realize that they actually tried to make a female version of Weekend at Bernie's. But after our previous discussion, because we actually did both of those films as part of the Rewatch podcast, it's interesting that they tried to do that because both of those films were reasonably financially successful, like give or take. I mean, the first one was, I can't remember what the second one was. So I can't imagine this female version being successful, but I could be wrong. I should do some research into it.
Yeah, and it does also beg to point out here that this will be not only the last collaboration between Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, but this is actually the last theatrical motion picture where either of them were in a leading role.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I read that this was Wilder's last feature film that he kind of made, which I found really, really surprising. I mean, he wasn't that old when this film came out, and I always kind of felt like he had more to offer. He was a reasonably big star. Like he wasn't like a Brad Pitt kind of guy or that kind of thing, if you know what I mean. That's probably a bad example, but he could hold his own. Like I feel like he could have done some more in the 90s. It's a shame that he kind of felt like this was not such a great effort, if you know what I mean, that he felt that he didn't have anything to offer, you know?
It's like he just, retired, kicked back, and lived off royalties for the rest of his life, probably.
I also kind of got the impression he was reasonably choosy about the roles he take. I mean, if you actually look at his IMDb filmography, he actually didn't really do all that much. I mean, there's some stuff in there, but most of the stuff he did is reasonably quality. I mean, going back to, Blazing Saddles in 1974, then he did like Young Frankenstein, Silver Streak, Stir Crazy, The Woman in Red, See No Evil, Hear No Evil. All those films are pretty rock solid films. And obviously, I haven't even mentioned Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in 1971. So like when you actually think about it, his quality over quantity kind of really does shine through a little bit. So maybe he was wise enough to kind of retire after this film. But as I said before, it's a shame that he felt the need to kind of go out on this note, because I felt like he probably could have offered a little bit more after this. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's very surprising that this film flopped because it was that reteaming of Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. And according to Peter Bogdanovich, the original director, it was the only reason this film got greenlit was because he managed to sign Gene Wilder to the project, and then he actively went after Pryor, who was at the time suffering from MS, and it's evident in this film that the man's not as active as he used to be, let's say, not to put him down or anything. I mean, it's tragic that he came down with MS there, but yeah, he managed to sign them both on, and this film was greenlit because of it, because they had very strong belief that the two of them together again would bring in the big bucks.
Yeah, interesting. It's also pretty clear too that he didn't write this film as well. Like, he didn't have any involvement in the writing. And I think that probably hampers his process a little bit. Like, if you look at his filmography, a lot of his films, like Young Frankenstein, Woman in Red, See No Evil, like, he had a hand in writing it. Like, he did quite a few more. But this one, like, he's literally just starring in it. And I can't imagine the director shift would have been like a very happy process for pretty much all involved. I mean, I always think from my perspective, Corey, like, whenever I hear about a director shifting gears and leaving a production halfway through, or even after like a film is completed, like totally completed and has like a release date, and then for whatever reason the studio suddenly decides to move the release date to a completely new date, like 6 months down the track, it's never a good sign, is it?
No, exactly. It's usually a sign that they have no faith in the film. They want to bring in a new editor, or they want to do reshoots or something to make it, I guess, from their perspective, better than it is. And a lot of the time that interference from the studio just sends it sideways.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure what happened with this film. I mean, Pryor and Wilder are fine in it. I mean, they certainly have the same kind of chemistry. I mean, you're dead right. Pryor doesn't have perhaps the energy that he had in his previous films, but that's pretty clear because he was a fairly unwell man at the time. But he certainly does his best. I think they both kind of do their best, but obviously we'll kind of get into it more as we discuss the actual film itself. But yeah, it's just kind of just one of those things. But anyway, it's all good.
We've got one last little bit of trivia here, and I thought this was actually quite interesting, is that the Swedish title for this movie was Se upp igen blindstier.
Nice.
Which in English translation is Look Out Again, Blind Fool, indicating that this would be a sequel to their previous film, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, which, when translated into Swedish, is Hör upp blindstier, or Listen Up, Blind Fool. And it's actually kind of believed that maybe they did this intentionally to make people believe that it was a sequel to that one. Because that one, it's a very funny movie, and why wouldn't you want to be associated with it, especially because you got the two lead actors in your movie. But, in actuality, if you've watched this movie, there is no connection other than Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor in this film. They're not the same characters. It's not the same story at all.
I always kind of got the impression that between Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, they had like a healthy respect for each other's talent, but I think it was a fairly strained relationship. I kind of always got the impression that both of them had egos on them and perhaps didn't like each other, how each other kind of behaved. Like, there was a discussion where Bogdanovich actually accuses Wilder of actually, campaigning the studio to kind of get him replaced, and he believes that he actually successfully did. So it would actually be pretty interesting to see that Bogdanovich footage that he did in the 5 weeks of filming in New York, because 5 weeks is a fair amount of time. I mean, we're talking like Back to the Future, kind of Eric Stoltz's Marty McFly time there. I mean, they shot a good portion of that film with Eric Stoltz before they decided to kind of get rid of him and get Michael J. Fox in that role instead. And let's face it, Bogdanovich is a very well-known director, and as much as I think Maurice Phillips does his best, he certainly doesn't have the pedigree that Bogdanovich would have had. And it would have been very interesting to see this film in probably slightly more capable hands with perhaps less studio kind of interference. I mean, it would have been very interesting.
It seems like this movie could be ripe for like a Criterion collection or something,
Yeah, totally.
Somebody track down that footage, remaster it, put it out there in a big collection DVD or something.
I don't think that'll happen because, let's face it, man, this isn't the biggest film in the world. I mean, me and you were actually having a discussion off air prior to this. Like, we're actually, when we do our podcast chats, we normally just have like a rough kind of synopsis that we kind of just talk about the film, and it was actually very hard to find one for this film, wasn't it?
Yeah, not a lot of people talk about this, but, in trying to find a decent layout for this movie just to keep us on track, did find that there's still a lot of articles about from the LA Times or the Hollywood Reporter or something like that, just a review of this movie. And to tell you the truth, a lot of them just really bag out Richard Pryor for having MS, and you're like, come on, it's not his fault he got MS. Like, give the guy a break. You're lucky that he's on the screen doing his thing here.
And he's, as I said, man, he's doing his best, and he's still funny. He's maybe not as funny as he has been in the past, but that's okay. I didn't expect that of it. He's playing a very different role too, let's not forget too. So anyway, we'll get into it. So should we shift over to our plot discussion, Corey?
Let's do it. Another you. I have to say, I love this opening part of it, and this is before the movie even starts. I love it when a film just breaks the fourth wall for no reason, really. Because it starts with this TriStar logo, right?
That's
and if
right.
you remember the old TriStar logo, the horse comes in, sprouts the wings, becomes a Pegasus, and then leaps over. But it's got this, like, narration from Richard Pryor, who's just like, whoa, fucking wings, Jesus, you fucking white horse.
Oh my lord, yeah, it's pretty funny, isn't it? I actually thought that there was something wrong with the copy that I was watching. I was like, what's happening? Is it out of sync? Is there a problem here? And then all of a sudden the film started and it was kind of okay, but I was taken back just a little bit when I saw that TriStar logo and then Richard Pryor swearing like within 2 minutes or 10 seconds of the film starting. It was crazy.
And it does open with Richard Pryor. He's immediately set up as being a con man.
Yep.
He's out on the street. He's playing the saxophone. People are loving it, but it's quickly revealed that he's just playing along to a cassette tape.
And he's absolutely killing it. And it actually comes a little bit later on in the film where there's somebody watching him playing saxophone that we'll get to, like about 3/4 of the way through the film that says, hey, man, this guy's a great saxophone player. They do a bit of a flashback to it, and he's standing there, he's like in this like bad wig, with his bad like kind of dreadlocks, and he's totally killing it on the saxophone, just taking all the money on. It's very much like they set the scene pretty quickly that you're in LA, aren't you? You're on Hollywood, the Walk of Fame, and it's pretty seedy, and there's like very touristy and all that kind of stuff too, yeah.
And I know you're a big music guy.
Yeah.
You might be able to answer this question. Were Milli and Vanilli outed as being lip syncers by 91? Was that like a late 80s thing, or did that come later?
I cannot recall, but I think it was later on, if I remember. I think it was like very early 90s because Milli Vanilli totally cleaned it up at the Grammys, and then they kind of got ousted. They sold tons and tons of records. I'm just looking them up right now. They were a group founded in 1988, but they had international success. Grammy Award for Best New Artist in 1990. So we're probably talking like 89, 90. So when this movie was probably in production and actually being shot was probably around 1990. So the fact that they were kind of using that as a template, it's pretty funny actually. Now that I think about it.
Because that's what I was thinking. I was like, I'm not sure if that had sort of come about, but yeah, the guy walks up, sees him with the dreadlocks and says, is he Milli or Vanilli? And I thought, like, is that supposed to be a thing that he is playing the saxophone in sync with the cassette player? Like, this guy knows that that he's not actually playing? Or is that just happenstance and then later Milli Vanilli were outed for that or something? I don't know, but still, it's just a weird thing that popped into my mind when I heard it.
Yeah, well, it says here, around 1991, they kind of got ousted. They confessed to reporters on the 12th of November 1990 that they actually did not sing on the record. So you know what? When this was in production, maybe they didn't know about that. Maybe they were kind of making a gag. But at the time, it wasn't, because this was released. When was it released again?
It was 91.
Yeah, it was 91. It was like May or something like that, wasn't it? Yeah, July 26th. So it probably was in production late 90.
So maybe like that was fresh in the news and they kind of took that and inserted the joke.
So we have Richard Pryor. He's clearly a con man. Doesn't he make his way like back into a strip club or something like that with the money he gets?
Wants to buy more drink with the money he's hustled.
Yeah, and then Richard Pryor kind of makes his way to, it's a community service.
Yeah, that's right. He's been fined for whatever reason and he owes the county or whatever a certain amount of hours and doing community service.
But he won't do any physical labor. And he makes it clear and you get the woman behind the counter is getting very irate with him, sort of saying, just because you've got a sore back or whatever, it doesn't preclude you from doing things. Like she keeps giving them all these suggestions, like you could go and lay bricks for a while, and he gets really upset with her and it's like, no, I can't do that. Like I've said very clearly, no physical labor. I can't do that. It's just never going to happen. She finds a job, going to like an asylum and actually assisting patients with like their re-emergence back into society. So he has to supervise. He'll pick someone up and take them to the doctor or go and look for a house to rent or whatever it might be.
Yeah, get some culture, go to the museum or whatever.
And he's going, okay, yeah, I can take care of this. So then after we kind of establish that very early kind of plot connection, we then shift to Gene Wilder, who we meet, who is in the asylum. And it's like a counseling session, and there's probably like 4 or 5 of these inmates, and they've all kind of got their grievances about life, and they're each in kind of varying stages of like mental kind of problems and whatnot, aren't they?
They're having this group thing, and you've learned that Gene Wilder, his character's name is George, is a pathological liar. But, you know, in this group, he's talking about, you know, reintegrating back into society. You know, obviously Pryor's going to come over and take him out. But like the rest of the group, like one guy's got like a sock puppet. This other guy's obsessed with like people's junk. And he's constantly asking like, you had a girlfriend, did you know, whip it out in front of her and stuff like that. It's like really bizarre. And then this other guy, he's constantly like doing impressions or something. It's a very weird sequence.
One of the guys in that film is actually Kevin Pollak. Did you notice him?
Yeah, he's the one who keeps doing all the impressions, right?
Yeah. He's a pretty well-known guy. He's been around in heaps. He was like, you know, in The Usual Suspects and tons of movies. He's one of those guys that you'll recognize his face, you know?
But yeah, it's just all the setup of, you know, George is being released from this clinic. He thinks he's learned to not lie because apparently he just lied to everybody. He had a girlfriend for a short time. She thought he was a Navy SEAL or something.
Not a Navy SEAL.
He has to be strong, and he has to get back out there, and hopefully he won't fall back into his old ways.
He keeps reiterating the fact that if he does lie, terrible things happen. Like, it's terrible. Like, it's so awful. Like, I can't do this. And he's really, I felt sorry for him because he really is trying to improve, and he's clearly got like an anxiety problem or some kind of lying issue or whatever it might be, and he's trying to improve his life, and he's struggling, isn't he? I think he is anyway. He's just trying to kind of get out there, but he's kind of a bit scared too, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like really terrified. But like all the patients, they've made this like a chimney top hat, like an Abraham Lincoln hat. So, you know, it's Honest Abe. As long as you wear the hat, you'll be fine.
Honest Dave, yeah, that's exactly right. So he rushes outside of the asylum, meets up with Richard Pryor character, who then commits to taking Wilder to the museum for the day. Like, you know, let's go out and kind of get some culture and actually get some fresh air and whatnot. And in the next shot, they're in the car and they're driving along to the museum, and Wilder is talking Pryor's ear off, and you can kind of tell very clearly that Pryor is just he's just not interested. He just wants to kind of just do the business, drop him off, and that's kind of that. And it's actually pretty low of Eddie Dash, the Richard Pryor character. He drops him at the museum. Pryor can clearly see that George is struggling, and he just says, right, here we go, we're at the museum, see you later, I'll talk to you later, or I'll come back in a few hours, whatever it might be. And George kind of freaks out a little bit, doesn't he? And he's like, what are you doing, Eddie? Like, I need you. And he goes, no, I've got things to do. I've got like a church group function or something like that, I think he says. Eddie says to George, well, if you've got $100, you know, you got some money, don't you, man? And he's like trying to hustle George, isn't he?
Exactly. Give me some money. I'll come inside with you. And they're not even at a real museum. It's a waxworks as well. So it's like, it's the only museum that Eddie knows of as well. So it's, you know, it's a pretty funny setup. And I think Wilder is really playing it up a lot. Like, he's immediately saying like, Eddie, you're my best friend.
Yeah, you're my best friend.
Like, he's only just met the dude. And Pryor, I think, is killing it. Just, you know, that laid back, like, what the fuck you talking about, man? He's like,
yeah.
I heard they put basil in everything. He's like, what are you fucking talking about, basil? Like,
and he takes him into the wax museum, and there's like a Frankenstein monster guy, like a guy in makeup kind of thing, and he taps Wilder on the shoulder and freaks him out, and he actually runs out of the wax museum at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And as he's running along the street, he bumps into what he thinks is a random stranger, and they all fall on the ground, and there's an awful lot of like sorries, oh gee, I didn't mean to do that, are you okay? And the guy that he bumps over recognizes George, but he doesn't call him George. He says, Abe, you're Abe, aren't you? You know, where have you been? I haven't seen you in ages. And they get into this like back and forth with each other, like on the street, about how the guy that fell over like owes Abe money. And Wilder is endlessly kind of saying, no, I think you've got the wrong guy. Like,
yeah,
my name's not Abe. My name's George. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. But this guy is absolutely insistent that George is Abe. Abe Fielding, might I add. So we kind of get this set up, don't we?
Exactly. And it's perpetuated by Eddie Dash, who comes over, sees this guy trying to give George money, and he's like, yeah, Abe, old buddy, of course, you know. The guy ends up walking away, but he sets a dinner with them, says, meet me at this restaurant later tonight, and I'll have the rest of your money for you. So it's the big setup of, like, you know, the con is on. Eddie's on this. He's just like, look, we're going to go there. Of course, George is like, I can't lie. I can't do it. What are we doing? And he's just like, well, how about you sit there and don't say anything, and I'll do all the talking. And, you know, he's just thinking about the money. This guy wants to give us some money. He thinks you're Abe Fielding, so let's just do this thing.
Yeah, let's just do it because there's money to be made and I'm a con guy and this is what I do. So let's just make this happen. Like, Eddie's not really thinking of anyone else other than himself, is he?
Exactly. Really? And, you know, it's strengthened that George must really bear a striking resemblance to this Abe Fielding guy, because he gets into the restaurant and everybody there's like, oh, Mr. Fielding, welcome back. Here, let me take your hat. Come on in, sit down. You know, we'll move people out of the way to let you in. So he's obviously also an important person.
It's something I enjoy about Wilder's acting style. Like, he's got this really gentle nature in the way he kind of delivers his lines. Like, he's very genuine. You can really tell, like even though this is a comedy, like, you can tell that George doesn't want to lie, does he? Like, he really means it. He's like, man, I can't lie. It's just, you know, if I do that, like, terrible things will happen. And, like, he's really scared about kind of doing it. But Eddie is really insistent upon him kind of, you know, completing the con and kind of meeting this guy. So they end up going to this dinner and they meet the guy that they bumped into. It's actually pretty funny, actually, because the wild card in this whole setup is Pryor, isn't it? Because they don't kind of account that Abe Fielding or George or whatever you want to call him is going to have a friend. They were expecting Abe to be by himself, but Pryor is kind of there too.
Don't tell me nothing. I'm asking Abe.
I don't like this, Eddie. It's not polite.
Maybe he can't talk about it, but I can.
What out, shithead? I'm talking to Abe.
I don't like it when you call my friend a shithead. And if you do it one more time, I'll cut your fucking balls off, which is something I'm very good at. K?
Yeah, sure, Abe.
Say K?
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 Sure, Abe.
You trying to tell me something?
No. Okay, Abe.
I don't want to sound unreasonable. I know you came for giving us thousands of dollars and all that shit.
Listen to me.
But don't call my friend a shithead again, okay?
Okay.
Now you can talk.
You know, shithead's okay. I can live with that.
You have any idea what this man has done for me? Huh?
It was nothing. I haven't done anything.
Nothing? Pulling me out of that explosion was nothing?
What explosion?
In the lift at Lady Tushingham's? Look at him. Look what it did to his brain. You see that? Look at this. Hello? Anybody home? Don't worry. He's got a titanium plate in there. When I hit him in the head, that actually feels good.
What the fuck?
Just don't call my friend a shithead again, okay?
Sure.
Okay with you, Al?
Okay with Al.
Maybe I had you pegged wrong, but don't ever call him. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't know. So, what happened in the lift?
What's the lift?
What happened in the lift? Lady Tushingham, you mean? I'm glad you asked. This is a wonderful story, Al. I can't wait to tell you.
The whole thing about Pryor saying, like, all you have to do is sit there and I'll do the talking goes sideways because this guy, he's a bookie, keeps telling him to shut up, like, I'm talking to Abe. And he goes, don't talk to me, shithead, I'm talking to Abe here. And that just sends George over the edge. And he immediately, at that point, starts to lie. And he takes on this persona of Abe Fielding and just launches on this dude. Like, don't call my friend a shithead, you hear me? Like,
or I'll rip your balls off, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Just intimidates this guy. And the guy's like, oh, okay, right. This couple shows up there. And they're like, hey, where have you been? been for 5 months? We haven't seen you.
Why haven't you called us?
He calls them over, and then he starts launching into stories about how they were in England with Lady Tushingham, and she
something like that.
Pull my finger, and she rips a fart or something. Then they were like commandos in a plane dropping whatever, and oh man, he just goes off the rails telling these wacky stories about how he met Eddie Dash. Man, it's crazy. Eddie says it later, like, you know, before I met you, the term bullshit artist was just like an empty sentiment.
You kind of take it to the next level. Yeah.
When you lie, you just convince everybody that what you're saying is true.
And that's the scenario that we kind of have. So it just kind of snowballs into this endless lying, and you kind of tell George is uncomfortable with it, but he's kind of going along for the ride as well, because these people are so convincing, aren't they? And you got to remember too, like, George does have mental issues. Perhaps he doesn't know exactly who he is. So these people are convincing. Somehow he ends up back at his house.
Yeah, his wife shows up. They're leaving the restaurant. He starts to feel guilty, right? He puts his Honest Abe hat back on, and he's thinking, oh, what have I done? Been lying all night. The hat flies off and gets crushed underneath the car, so now he doesn't have that anymore. And yeah, his wife, Elaine, comes out and starts berating him about disappearing for 5 months, and she wants to drag him home, and of course Eddie can't go with them. Because that's just a bit weird, and she drags him off back to their lush Beverly Hills estate.
She's like, where have you been? I can't believe, it's been 5 months. Give me one reason why we should stay together. And like, it's Mercedes Rule. Like, I actually quite like her as an actor. I've always liked her as an actress. I think she's really convincing. I think she's a really good actress. It's actually something that we haven't really mentioned too much about. There's a fair amount of pedigree in this film as well. I mean, obviously you got Pryor as Eddie Dash, you got Gene Wilder as George and Abe Fielding. Mercedes Rule's in this. Stephen Lang, I kind of always think of him as Avatar whenever I see him.
Avatar, the guy with the scars down his face, yeah.
Vanessa Williams from Ugly Betty and various kind of other shows. Vincent Schiavelli. Now, I don't know, he's probably not a name that you recognize, but he's one of those, he's got a really strange face about him. He's the dentist in this film.
Right, yeah. I always think of him in Dorf on Golf.
Yeah, I always think of him from the movie Ghost.
Right, yeah.
So there's a fair amount of acting talent in this film. It's just a shame it doesn't add up to a little bit more, but obviously we'll kind of keep going. So we meet Mercedes Rule, and we kind of establish that they're a partner, don't we?
They're back at the estate in this big mansion, and she's berating him for having been gone for so long, and he's kind of trying to tell her that he's not Abe, that he's George, and she's just not having a bar of it. No matter what he says, she comes back and, she's like, I'm pretty sure you're having an affair or something, so don't get into bed with me or whatever. And he's kind of distracted because she's getting undressed while all this is going on too.
Yeah,
so she's got like real lacy underwear on and stuff, and he's kind of jittery about it. He keeps slipping like breasts and titties into his sentence as he's talking to her. It's really good.
After they have some kind of argument, and I think we get to is it the next morning? And they're having like breakfast.
Eddie shows up, yeah.
Eddie shows up, that's right. And George wants to introduce Eddie to his wife, and he makes up this crazy story about Joe Frazier. He says, do you remember who Joe Frazier is? And she goes, yeah, like, Rumble in the Jungle or whatever it was called.
Yeah, something from Manila or something.
Yeah, the Thriller in Manila.
Thriller from Manila, yeah.
And he's sort of saying that, he got really sick after the fight. Took lots of drugs or did something.
He contracted malaria or something. If she's like when they first come in and he's like, can I stay with you for maybe a couple of years or something like that? And he's telling her this story about like him gaining muscle back and all that. And you think she's looking at them like, what bullshit are you feeding me? But she sort of slumps her head for a second, looks back up at them and says, that was a beautiful story. I was very rude to you just before. Very sorry about that. I'll get the guest room made up. And you're like, what?
Yeah, I know.
So bizarre. And of course, like, even before they were doing this, Eddie's like walking through the mansion just like stealing shit. He's just pocketing all kinds of like metal things.
George comes down and says, what are you doing, Eddie? And he says, I'm taking this to get it cleaned.
Yeah, get it polished. He's like, oh yeah, it is kind of dirty. So random.
Eddie wants to know if he can live with us for a while.
You know, just for a little while, you know, till my mom gets better. A couple years tops. No, what do you mean, no? Come on, Peaches.
Peaches?
Yeah, I mean, Abe has something to say. Just hear the man out.
All right. What is it?
Well, you know, Elaine, Eddie isn't who you think he is.
No? Who is he?
Did you ever hear of a prize fighter by the name of Joe Frazier?
You mean the thriller from Manila?
That's it. The thriller from Manila.
Ooh.
You know, right after that fight with Ali when they were both in the Philippines, Joe Frazier got malaria. And he lost a lot of weight. I mean, a lot of weight. He even shrunk a little bit. And after they got it under control, even then, he thought, well, if anyone ever saw him like that, you know, his career as a prize fighter would be finished. No one would ever give him a shot at the title. So he decided he better change his name and his identity for a little while, just till he could sort of work his way back into shape. It's been a rough road back, right, champ?
Hey, I'm not complaining. You know what I mean? I just want another crack at the title.
That's it. Save him, pal. I'm gonna help you, Joe. I mean, Eddie. Sorry, champ. I won't slip again. You know, Elaine, he's the best friend I got. He just needs a place where he can, you know, lick his wounds for a while and put him on maybe 50, 60 pounds back on.
That is an amazing story.
Jeez.
I was very rude to you a minute ago. I'm awfully sorry. I want you to stay, really. Please do.
I feel so exposed.
Please, let me see if I can get the guest bedroom made up.
So I mean, during this phase of the film, like, I can't lie, I had no idea what was going on. I found it a bit confusing. I was like, what's going on? Why are they calling this guy Abe?
It's such a bizarre thing, because you think is this really just the setup? They've just mistaken this guy for this Abe Fielding person, and, like, that's how it's going to play out? Like, they kind of drop in at one point that because he was having an affair, that this woman's husband, like, if he found out, he had threatened to, like, kill him or something, chop him up or something like that. So he thinks, like, oh, that's why Abe Fielding hasn't been around for 5 months. He's been murdered or something. So you're like, where is this going to go?
It becomes apparent not too far away where this is going to go, because we then flash to, like, an evening kind of scene of some description, and we meet a new character that we haven't seen before, a guy named Rupert Dibbs, played by Stephen Lang. Now, Stephen Lang's one of those guys, he's been around for a long, long time, but you probably know him from Avatar. He was the badass person who used to yell an awful lot in that film. He's quite a very good actor, and to be fair, he's actually pretty good in this, but it becomes pretty clear that he is been, you know, like, where have you been, Abe? I haven't seen you for 5 months. Why didn't you call? Like, and it comes clear that he's kind of like taking care of the business side of things, isn't he?
Yeah, he pretty much comes in and they start calling him Dibsy and stuff like that. Like, again, like, the bullshit just comes in for George. Yeah. He's just immediately like, hey, Dibsy, like, hey, old buddy, pal, where you been? Yeah. They just keep talking to the guy, and the guy's just like, well, you know, I need a signature on this stuff, but, you know, thank God you're here. I can get you to sign all this stuff. And he goes, oh, I need some cash. And he's like, well, you need some cash. Here you go. I need to replace my credit cards. I lost those. Here's some more credit cards for you. And the whole thing plays out. And Eddie immediately steals all that money and credit cards and bails out of there. He just leaves immediately.
All that stuff happened way too easily. But then again, we don't really understand what's exactly happening here. I mean, there's a long game being played. And let's just say that Rupert is involved very, very heavily, because after this all occurs, we then flash to a scene that doesn't involve George and Eddie, where it actually becomes clear that Rupert Dibbs, or Stephen Lang's character, he's talking to Mercedes Rule, and it becomes clear that they're actually actors who have been hired by Rupert to convince George that he's actually Abe Fielding for a variety of reasons. We don't quite understand why at this stage, do
it? Had something to do with a business, like a very successful brewery business, Fielding Beer. The owner, Abe Fielding Sr., had died. Dibbs thought he would inherit the company because he was the right-hand man. Turns out that Abe Fielding Sr. had a son, and it was going to go to him. They tracked him down, but he had just very recently died in a car crash. So in order to keep the company out of probate, and so Dibbs could make his play to inherit the company, he had to make them think that Abe Fielding Jr. was still alive.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's been employing a variety of people to try and fill the role, and now they've landed on George, who is a perpetual liar.
Yeah.
And he's hired actors and stuff, including Elaine, whose, I think her real name is like...
Mimi Kravitz.
Mimi Kravitz or Missy Kravitz, something like that. And they're all just actors, and they're pushing George to lie, pretty much, to take on, to go over the edge and continue to lie. So everybody within the company and whoever will think he is Abe Fielding. And it's kind of going a bit sideways for Dibbs.
It's totally going sideways.
But luckily, Eddie's there, and he kind of approaches him to also get in on this con because, well, he's a professional con man. Dibbs is kind of a novice at this stuff.
So he kind of convinces him to get involved. And he even convinces Eddie at some stage to try and kill George, but he can't really go through with it, does he?
They kind of just thinks, you know, I'm going to make 10 grand, I got to keep him around for a week, and then all the paperwork will be done, and Dibbs will take the company and whatever. But yeah, it becomes pretty evident pretty quickly to them that Dibbs is going to try and have him killed. And yeah, he even approaches Eddie to actually do it.
Regardless of all the lying that they're all doing and the long game that Rupert is playing to actually gain control of the company, George is actually still trying to make a connection, like a genuine connection with Mercedes Rule, because he actually quite likes her, doesn't he? Like, he's like, man, he's got eyes for her, and he keeps trying to like get in her pants and stuff and all kinds of things.
I know, like he keeps talking with Eddie about badumph, which I thought was weird. The way he like approaches her and goes, "Would you like a little badumph?"
Yeah.
But yeah, he really actually likes her and he wants to make this connection. And it kind of takes me back to his character in Stir Crazy, because he really manages to woo her by just walking up to her and saying, I like yodeling and my favorite food is the schnitzel and stuff like that, and takes her to this German restaurant where he sings her a yodel. The yodel Elaine.
I got a bit perplexed when the German restaurant showed up and he started singing. It was so strange. It was really weird.
Well, it's obviously not him as well.
No, clearly.
But she loves this yodel, and she starts getting in on the yodel with him, and it's obviously not Mercedes Rule doing the yodeling either. Yeah. But they have this whole yodel back and forth, and she falls for him.
Mercedes Rule starts kind of caring for George. She stops calling him Abe and starts calling him George, doesn't she?
Exactly.
And they kind of form a bit of a connection. And then we've obviously still got, you know, Eddie in play and Rupert in play, and as we said before, Rupert actually convinces Eddie to try and kill George.
They suspect that this is where it's going because Dibbs has them taking him to dentists and doctors and stuff. And he kind of says, well, this is just to establish that he is Abe Fielding. But while they were in the dentist, these two women are randomly talking about how 2 charred corpses were found and that they can identify charred corpses through the dental records. And you're just like, that's a really weird conversation for two people just be having in a dentist waiting room. Yeah. But they kind of get onto it. Yeah. So he kind of, you know, they kind of go to Dibbs and say, we know you're doing this. And he goes, no, I'm just setting up. He is who we say he is. Mercedes Rule leaves, but then immediately Dibbs is like, you know what? I am going to kill him. Like, I need him out of the way and I need you to do it. And he says, look, I'm not a murderer. I'm a con man. But he starts talking money, write down whatever number you want. So you think, all right, so maybe Eddie is going to kill George.
I always kind of get the impression his allegiances do lie with George, but you do kind of get that impression that, I mean, let's face it, he's a con man and, you know, he does lead a life of kind of lying himself. Like, I wouldn't call him the most committed guy in the world. I'm sure he does have a price, doesn't he? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird. I'm not sure I ever really bought that he would kill George. I mean, I think by this point, you kind of established that he likes George. He doesn't like Dibbs.
The film makes you think that he might have done it.
I don't know if they do a very good job at that.
I agree. I agree that they didn't do a very good job, but they do give the impression that maybe he did kill him because we do get a funeral.
They go out hunting, the old hunting thing where he says,
yes,
you guys go out, you tell him, hey, look, there's a bear. He turns around and you shoot him. Like, that's how we'll do it.
It's actually a pretty good sequence, actually, because there's an actual bear there, isn't there?
Yeah. And Dibbs is recording the whole thing. He gives George this hunting jacket that's got a microphone hidden up under the collar. And so he can actually set up Eddie Dash if he has to. You know, if Eddie goes back on his word, well, hey, I've got this recording on you. So, yeah, they make you think that Eddie has gone ahead and shot him.
You hear the gunfire, and that's the last thing you see. And then we cut to the funeral, and you have Rupert Dibbs kind of giving a eulogy, isn't he?
Yeah, he's even got all the actors back and says, we're doing a curtain call. Like, think of it like a curtain call, and you're all going to come in as his friends, and we'll eulogize him.
Keep in mind, too, we haven't really mentioned that Eddie Dash has a bit of a love interest in this film, which is Vanessa Williams.
She comes out of nowhere. For no reason at all.
Don't you meet her right at the start of the film for like 30 seconds?
He talks to her like he's met her before or something, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've seen this woman in this film.
Yeah, but it turns out she works for Rupert Dibbs, and she works for the same company that Abe Fielding kind of controls, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And the funeral itself is actually really weird.
Isn't it, like a cryogenics place or something?
Which is attached to the brewery owned by Fielding Beer, and you're like... So they're a beer brewery and a cryogenics lab? What?
Yeah, I know. It's just strange, isn't it? It's really, really weird and doesn't really make a lot of sense. So you have this sequence where he's literally in the casket and people are crying and there's flowers everywhere and Rupert Dibbs is giving a eulogy, and out of nowhere, I think Vanessa Williams walks in and says to Rupert Dibbs, look, there's an urgent phone call. Can you please come outside immediately? And Rupert runs outside and clearly gets taken away to somewhere that you don't really know. And Vanessa Williams kind of looks at Richard Pryor and kind of gives him like a wink. And Richard Pryor kind of looks at her and goes, yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for helping me kind of thing. And then out of nowhere, Gene Wilder leaps out of his casket.
He starts yodeling at first and then leaps out.
And just freaks everyone out. And then obviously the jig is up.
Yeah, and this is kind of where it shows like how Eddie is the better con man and Dibbs was just an amateur, because he's like, you were trying to do a recording of me killing Abe, which is now useless to you because Abe's not actually dead, but I have recordings of all of our conversations where you're asking me to murder him, and I've also now got all your files that proves that he is Abe Fielding, so he can inherit this brewery, and we're just going to take everything. And he, of course, doesn't like that. And he tries to go and kill George.
He tries to kill George, and there's this weird sequence where they're like, he's inside, like, I don't even know, like a stirrer of some description.
Like the vat or something where they do the beer.
And he's kind of being like twirled around, and Stephen Lang keeps hitting all these buttons and things keep happening inside the vat, and you don't really know what's kind of happening. And then out of nowhere, they run in and they open up and he kind of rises from this foam.
So weird. I don't quite know like what the deal with this ending was, because Elaine comes in and she says, I love you, George. You know, she actually says his real name. And he says, I need to tell the truth right now, or I don't think you'll ever believe me again. And he tells everybody that he is not Abe Fielding, that he's George. But it kind of seems like he's still going to inherit the company anyway.
Don't all of his, like, cronies from the mental asylum come to the funeral for Abe Fielding? Aren't they there?
Well, the doctor was like, when he got to the casket, he went, oh, if only you told us you were actually Abe Fielding, I probably could have helped you. So they were all convinced that he's Abe Fielding too. And I was like, this is weird. But yeah, he sends like all the employees home and says when you come back, you'll get like a 10% raise or something. And I'm like, but he just told everybody that he's not Abe. Like, why is he still getting this company?
Yeah, it's a strange conceit. but, it is what it is. I mean, that's kind of like almost like the end of the film. I mean,
that's pretty much it, yeah.
Eddie and George get the brewery, Mercedes rules, sticks around, and Stephen Lang gets taken away by the police to see what kind of ever happens. But it's a strange kind of ending, isn't it?
Well, yeah, they end, they're on a beach.
Yeah, that's it.
George and Elaine, they're married. They're holding, they're getting a picture that says just married. And then Vanessa's there with Eddie Dash, and it says just about married. And I'm like, this character's like nothing, Vanessa, so whatever. And then George goes ahead and writes on it, partners forever. And that's how it ends, like freeze frame with them holding the sign, hugging.
I actually really quite liked that bit on the beach. All of a sudden, I was kind of taken outside the film a little bit, and I just saw that as just Wilder and Pryor kind of having this really nice moment.
That's what I thought. Yeah, this is more Wilder and Pryor, partners forever.
I thought it was really quite nice. It was a nice way to end their 4-film partnership, because however problematic maybe their relationship might have been behind closed doors, they did have a really great on-screen chemistry, and they produce some classic films, and it's good cinema. It's great.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good little ending snapshot of the two of them to say, yeah, we've done a lot of films together and we're good friends.
We couldn't have done this without each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, kids, guess it's time to ring down the curtain on this little production of ours, huh? I think we made a hit, don't you? Letitia, I prophesy a big career for you. I mean that, dear. The memorial service will be this afternoon in the Fielding Chapel, which is just adjoining the brewery.
Brewery.
I will be expecting the 3 of you to attend. Jerome, just think of it as a curtain call.
So you're saying that we're burying him as Fielding, even though he wasn't really Fielding?
Yes. I feel it's the least we can do. You know, the poor guy, he had no family, no friends. It's a terrible tragedy, but accidents happen. Don't they, Eddie?
It was an accident.
Of course it was. Oh, no one's saying it wasn't, Eddie. Nobody blames you.
How do we play this? Like we knew him as Abe or what?
Yes, of course, Jerome. I mean, that's the whole point now, isn't it? Look, I want you to play the sad but not morose. Ken, upset but please, no tears, huh?
Poor guy, I feel awful.
Yes, well, you use that, Eleanor. You see, you save it for later and you use it. That's called method acting. Look, everybody, I just want to express my gratitude to a very, very talented ensemble of thespians. Bravo! Bravissimo!
So, ratings, recommend? What do you reckon?
It's a bit of a weird one. If you have to watch it because it's Wilder and Pryor. But I'm not going to recommend it because it's not a great film. I'd probably give this 4 Georges out of 10. I think that's kind of where I'm at. It's a little inconsistent. Wilder is interesting in it, Pryor is interesting, but that's about it. The direction's not great. There's not much else about it that's great. It didn't really hold my interest as well as it kind of should. I'm glad I watched it because I really like these actors, but finishing at See No Evil, Hear No Evil, that's probably not a bad place to end, is it? I mean, it's a great film. What about you, mate?
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you. I'm just going to go like a middle of the road 5, This is like, you can watch it, but it's not their best at all. Their best was See No Evil, Hear No Evil. Like, that movie was funny as hell.
And the rewatchability on it is gold.
It's not excellent that, this is the movie that they went out on as a duo, but I think it's fine. Honestly, the first time I watched it, I was kind of confused about how they went from plot point to plot point. It was very confusing. The second time around, I really understood it more. Like, what was actually happening here and why they had George there and why they were trying to convince him that he was Abe Fielding and stuff like that. Like, just that first time watching it, I was like, what? Like, I just didn't understand how everything moved forward. Second time around, I actually enjoyed it a bit more because I had the idea of, what the plot was going to be, and I could pay more attention to how they got from plot point to plot point. And it does make sense. It does. It's just hard to get it because, it's not the best cut together film.
As we mentioned in the trivia, I think it would be very interesting to see the Peter Bogdanovich cut, to see what they actually shot. I would have loved it. I think this would have been 20 times better a film if it was in the hands of a more capable director, because let's not forget, this was Maurice Phillips' last feature film that he actually made. I mean, he has stayed making television, but he certainly hasn't made a mark on the feature film kind of side of things.
And that's probably where it's all come from at the end of the day, was there was interference halfway through the making of this film, and a lot of reshoots were done. So, yeah, it's kind of just, it's disconnected a little bit, so it doesn't quite play or flow as well as you would hope.
I think we both agree that as far as, probably See No Evil, Hear No Evil is probably the best. I'd probably put, probably Stir Crazy second, Silver Streak third, and I'd probably put this one last. That's probably where I'm kind of at.
I'd go with you, but I'd swap positions with Silver Streak and Stir Crazy, because I really enjoyed Silver Streak.
Silver Streak was deceivingly good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. But yeah, without a doubt, See No Evil, Hear No Evil was the best. It was great, 4 weeks there. Some better than others, but still a good 4 weeks spent, I think, talking about these movies.
Pretty fun films to watch, too. I mean, they're both great actors, so it's worth doing just for that.
And we're not at the end.
No.
We're going to throw in a couple of bonus episodes for this.
We kind of had a bit of a chat. Wilder and Pryor, yes, they made 4 great films together, but they made some pretty interesting films by themselves as well. And we're obviously not going to go too deep into it, but we just thought as bonus episodes, we're just going to do 2. So we both chose one. I chose my favourite Richard Pryor film, and you chose a Gene Wilder film that you weren't as familiar with as maybe some of his rest.
So we're going to, next week, discuss Brewster's Millions, and then the week after we're going to discuss Gene Wilder in The Woman in Red.
Nice.
I'm looking forward to, just a little 2 off to cap off this season and sort of see how these guys do when they're not together. Then I guess we should make an announcement now about what we're going to do once we've wrapped up Wilder and Pryor.
Yeah, this is a bit out of left field too, isn't it?
Yeah, and we haven't gotten into horror. We've done sci-fis, we've done comedies, but how about we get into a horror franchise and discuss the 12 films in the Friday the 13th franchise.
Yeah, so a little bit of Jason.
Yes, and I think a lot of varying quality.
But that's okay.
Yeah, there's 12 films total, so Friday the 13th, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, the final chapter, Friday the 13th, 5, A New Beginning, then Jason Lives,
yep.
part 6, and then part 7, New Blood, part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, then Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, final again. I guess there's 2 finals in this series.
Yeah, there's a few finals.
Still not the final, though, because after that is Jason X, then Freddy vs. Jason, and then the Friday the 13th remake from 2009. So
nice.
Very interesting, I think. And like I said, I'm pretty sure some varying quality. I have seen them all before. You, not so much.
This is going to be new for me. I kind of have seen the original, but maybe past that, very few of them I've seen. So it's new territory for me. I'm looking forward to it because I wouldn't necessarily classify myself as horror being my strongest kind of genre of cinema, but I'm willing to kind of dive into the deep end and have a good chat with you about it. So it should be exciting.
Well, I'm sure we'll debate about whether or not some of these installments are actually horror films, but
nice.
We'll get to that after we finish our bonus episodes for Wilder and Pryor.
All right, so that's it for this episode of the Rewatch Podcast. Keep up with listener interaction by joining our Facebook page at facebook.com/Rewatch Podcast, or follow the show on Twitter at Rewatch Pod, and visit our webpage rewatchpodcast.podomatic.com.
And as always, if you want to send us your thoughts, you can write us an email or record a voice message and send it to the rewatchpodcast@gmail.com. And if you've enjoyed the show, please consider giving us a rate and review on iTunes. That's always very helpful. You can help support us by heading over to patreon.com/rewatchpodcast, where you can make a monthly contribution as little as $1. And that really helps out the show. And of course, our entire back catalogue is up on YouTube, so you can just search the Rewatch Podcast and subscribe today. All right, thanks a lot, Nathan. Really looking forward to getting into Brewster's Millions next week.
I'm looking forward to it. It should be great.
Just leaves me to say, until next time, I'm not your husband. I'm a Volvo salesman.
Come on over here and give me a wet one.
The Rewatch Podcast is not associated with the copyright holders of these films, and no copyright infringement is intended.
Now listen to me. I know that this is a delicate situation, but let's talk a little sense.
The use of any and all copyrighted material is only for parody, news analysis, critique, or educational purposes as provided in Title 17, aka Fair Use.
Mercy.
Music provided by Kevin McCloud at incompetech.com.
Yeah, get that ass
Copyright 2017, the Rewatch Podcast.
I hope you had fun, because I ain't gonna have no fun.
Hi, Rewatch Podcast listeners. I'm Corey.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Nathan.
First off, let me say that we have all had a blast doing the Rewatch Podcast. Every week, we put out another episode for free for you. And although we enjoy these discussions with each other, we truly do this for you guys out there in podcast land.
That's right, Corey. But we are here today to tell you about Patreon. Every week, there are costs involved in podcasting about film and television, including hosting and bandwidth charges, our own personal internet usage, and film or show rentals and purchases. So, we're asking you to become a Patreon supporter.
If you can afford as little as $1 to throw our way per month, it would really help us keep the lights on. And if you want to send $100 our way every month, we wouldn't turn that down either. But it's your choice, and we appreciate the support you bring.
As always, we strive to bring you the best quality shows we can create, and we hope that you enjoy them. So head on over to patreon.com/rewatchpodcast to become one of our patrons and show your support for the Rewatch Podcast.
And if we get enough patrons, we may even be able to produce exclusive content just for the supporters in the form of simply getting episodes before the main feed release, or even bonus film discussion episodes as a thank you for your support. The website again is patreon.com/rewatchpodcast.
Thanks, everyone.